The first thing I learned in the attic was how to measure time by the cracks in the ceiling. There were 4 to 7 of them. I counted them my first week, lying on the thin mattress that Celeste had placed in the center of the room, staring up at the plaster vaults that had once stored steamer trunks and hat boxes, and the forgotten costumes of my grandmother's debutante years. By my 3rd month, I could tell the season by which cracks caught the morning light, the eastern ones in summer, the southern ones in winter, the thin web in the northwest corner that only glowed in October, when the angle of the sun aligned with the single boarded window like a key sliding into a lock. I was 14 years old. I had been kissed once, in the garden, by a girl named Margaret who smelled like jasmine and whose hands had trembled against my waist. I had been alive for 5,110 days, and I was about to spend the next 2,920 of them in 800 square feet of vaulted silence, learning that freedom is not a place but a calculation, a geometry of patience, a mathematics of survival. My name is Rowan. I'm 34 years old. I'm an interior architect in Savannah, Georgia, which means I spend my days designing spaces where people want to live, rooms with light, with flow, with doors that open instead of seal. I have a firm with 12 employees. I have a house with windows on every wall. And I have a museum, built next to the mansion where I was imprisoned, that contains the exact dimensions of my childhood cage. But I also have a screwdriver. Small, brass, worn smooth by 8 years of weekly use. I keep it in my pocket always because you never know when you'll need to loosen a screw. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Rowan, and this channel is where we tell the truth about the families who call it protection when it's erasure, who call it love when it's architecture of control. If this is your first time listening, hit that subscribe button. We post stories every week, real stories, hard stories, stories about women who stopped measuring their lives by other people's walls. Here's my story. My mother died when I was 10. Breast cancer, diagnosed too late. Treated with the desperate optimism of Southern women who believe that politeness can cure tumors. She lasted 11 months. I remember the hospice bed in the drawing room, the smell of gardenias that Celeste, then just that woman from the club, brought in vases, so large they blocked my view of my mother's face. I remember my father holding my mother's hand, his shoulders shaking, while I sat on the stairs and tried to understand that the person who had braided my hair and read me The Secret Garden and told me that my drawings were good enough for the Museum of Modern Art was not coming back. She didn't come back. And 6 months later, neither did my father's judgment. Celeste was 32 when she married him. I was 10, almost 11, still drawing in sketchbooks that my mother had bought me, still believing that grief was a temporary weather pattern that would clear if I just waited patiently. Celeste was beautiful in the way of Mississippi pageant queens, tall, blonde, with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that showed nothing at all. She wore white to the wedding. A fresh start, she called it. New beginnings for all of us. She didn't look at me during the ceremony. Not once. But at the reception, she found me hiding in the pantry, eating petit fours because they were small enough to swallow without tasting, and she knelt down, her white dress pooling on the floor like a warning, and she said, "Rowan, sweetheart, I'm going to take such good care of you. Your mother would want that. Your father needs that. And you need a mother who knows how the world works." I didn't know then that how the world works meant how to control what people see. I didn't know that Celeste's smile was a structural element, load-bearing, designed to support the weight of her ambition. I just knew that my father smiled more when she was around, that the house seemed brighter, that someone was making decisions again after the paralysis of my mother's death. My father died 2 years later. Heart attack, the doctors said. He was 56, overweight, stressed, a man who had built a real estate empire on handshake deals and bourbon breakfasts, and the kind of charm that Southern men mistake for character. I found him in his study, slumped over a contract, his face the color of the port he drank after dinner. I was 12. I screamed until my throat bled. I screamed for Celeste, for the servants, for my mother who was already dead and couldn't hear me. Celeste arrived first. She didn't scream. She closed the door. She knelt beside my father and checked his pulse with the efficiency of someone who had done this before or had imagined doing it. Then she stood up and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since the wedding, and I saw something in her eyes that I would later learn to recognize in my own mirror: calculation. "Rowan," she said, "your father loved you, but he didn't prepare for this. The estate is complicated. You're too young to understand. I'm going to take care of everything for both of us. She did take care of everything. The funeral, which was small and tasteful, and attended by people who had already begun calling her Mrs. Ashford instead of the new wife. The lawyers, who explained that my father's will left everything to Celeste, with a provision for me, an allowance controlled by her, until I turned 25, contingent on my appropriate behavior and continued residence in the family home. The servants, who were dismissed within a month and replaced by people who spoke only when spoken to and never looked me in the eye. I didn't understand. Not then. I was 12. I was grieving. I was drawing in my sketchbooks, trying to capture my father's study, my mother's garden, the way light fell through the oak trees in the side yard. I was trying to hold onto something solid in a world that had become liquid, shifting, unreliable. And then I kissed Margaret. She was the gardener's daughter, 16, visiting for the summer while her father pruned the azaleas. We met in the rose garden, where my mother had taught me the Latin names of flowers, Rosa chinensis, Rosa gallica, Rosa damascena, and where Margaret taught me that lips were softer than petals and that my heart could beat in a rhythm that had nothing to do with grief. It was a single kiss. Clumsy, brief, terrified. The jasmine was blooming. The bees were loud. And Celeste was watching from the library window. She didn't confront me. Not that day. She waited until dinner, where she served my favorite meal, fried chicken, biscuits, the foods my mother had made on Sundays, and she smiled her pageant smile and asked about my day, my drawings, my friendship with the gardener's daughter. I lied. I was 12. I didn't know how to do anything else. That night, she came to my room. She was wearing a nightgown that looked like something my mother would have worn, white and flowing, and she sat on the edge of my bed and she said, "Rowan, sweetheart, I saw you in the garden today." With Margaret, I froze, my blood became plaster. My breath became dust. "Girls who don't know how to behave need time to reflect," she continued. Her voice was soft, maternal, the voice she used for church socials and charity luncheons. "Your mother would have been so disappointed. Your father, God rest him, would have been ashamed. But I understand. You're confused. You're grieving. You need guidance." She stood up. She smoothed my hair the way my mother used to, but her fingers were cold, precise, like she was measuring me for something. "Pack your things, sweetheart, just your books and your nightgown. You're going to have a new room. A quiet room where you can reflect, where you can learn to be a good girl." I didn't pack. I didn't understand. I followed her up the stairs, past my bedroom, past the guest rooms, past the servants' quarters that were now empty, up the narrow staircase that led to the attic where my grandmother's trunks were stored, where the Christmas decorations lived, where I had played hide-and-seek as a child and thought it was adventure. Celeste opened the door. She gestured me inside. I walked in, still confused, still believing this was temporary, still trusting that the woman who called me sweetheart would not harm me. "Good night, Rowan," she said, and she closed the door. I heard the lock click. I heard her footsteps descend the stairs, and I heard nothing else for 8 years. The room was 800 square feet. I measured it with my footsteps, 20 by 40, with a ceiling that vaulted to 14 feet at its peak. There was a mattress on a metal frame, a chamber pot, a basin for washing, and a single window boarded with oak planks that had been nailed from the outside, sealed with caulk, painted over so many times that the wood and the wall had become indistinguishable. There were books, a Bible, Emily Post's Etiquette, biographies of Southern women who had overcome adversity through piety and silence. No sketchbooks, no pencils, no way to draw, to create, to process the world except through the one tool Celeste couldn't confiscate, my mind. She visited twice a day, morning and evening. She brought food on a tray, adequate, nutritious, bland. She collected the chamber pot. She asked, always, the same question, "Have you learned to be a good girl, Rowan?" I didn't answer at first. I screamed. I pounded on the door. I threw the chamber pot, the basin, the books. I cried until my eyes swelled shut. I begged. I threatened. I promised anything: to be good, to be quiet, to never kiss anyone again, to become whatever she wanted me to be. She didn't respond. She just smiled, collected the debris, and left. The door locked. The silence returned. After 3 months, I stopped screaming. After 6, I stopped crying. After a year, I stopped expecting rescue, and I started measuring. I measured the room, the cracks in the ceiling, the angle of the light through the boarded window, the temperature variations, warmer near the chimney stack, cooler by the north wall, the sound of Celeste's footsteps on the stairs, heavier in the morning, lighter in the evening, absent on Sundays when she went to church, and left me with a cold lunch prepared the night before. I measured time. I scratched marks on the wall behind the mattress, one for each day, grouped in 7s, counted in months. I learned to identify the seasons by the quality of the light, the temperature, the sounds from outside, birds in spring, cicadas in summer, the particular silence of winter when even the oak tree seemed to hold its breath. And I started drawing. I found charcoal in the fireplace, remnants of logs that had burned in some previous winter, blackened sticks that left marks on plaster. I found berries in the small garden that grew in the cracked pot by the window, pokeberries, dark purple, that stained my fingers and the walls with a color that was almost blue. I mixed them with water from the basin, with dust from the floor, with anything that could hold pigment. I drew on the walls. Not images, I didn't have the skill or the materials for that. But plans. Maps. Architectural drawings of the room I was in, the house below, the world I remembered. I drew the mansion from memory, the drawing room, the library, the garden, the oak tree. I drew my mother's face, my father's study, the rose garden where I had kissed Margaret and learned that I was something Celeste could not allow. I drew escape routes. Not real ones, I knew I couldn't break the door, couldn't fit through the chimney, couldn't survive a jump from the window even if I managed to remove the boards. But I drew them anyway, because the act of drawing freedom was itself a kind of freedom. The act of imagining a door was itself a door. And I found the screwdriver. It was in a steamer trunk, buried under moth-eaten furs and yellowed lace. A small brass screwdriver, the kind used for eyeglasses or jewelry boxes, left behind by some previous occupant of the attic who had needed to repair something and had forgotten to take their tool. It was smaller than my pinky finger. It was the most valuable thing I had ever held. I used it on the window, not to pry the boards that would have been noticed, would have brought Celeste running, would have resulted in punishment I couldn't imagine. I used it on the screws, the ones that held the hinges of the boarded window, the ones that had been painted over so many times that they were invisible unless you knew to look for them. 1 turn per week. That was my limit. Any more and the paint might crack, might reveal my work, might bring Celeste's cold fingers and her question about good girls. 1 turn per week, for 8 years, while I drew on the walls and measured the cracks and learned that patience is not waiting but building screw by screw day by day, until the structure that holds you becomes the structure that releases you. I was 22 when the last screw came free. It was my birthday. I had been in the attic for 2,920 days. I had drawn on every wall. I had memorized 4 to 7 cracks, and I had a screwdriver, worn smooth by use, that fit in my palm like a key. I didn't break the boards. I pushed them gently, carefully, the way you push a door you aren't sure is unlocked. They swung outward, silently, on hinges that I had loosened over 416 weeks of careful, patient, invisible work. The oak tree was there. Its branches reached the window. I had planned this, measured the distance, calculated the angle, known from my drawings that the tree had grown closer in 8 years, that its strongest branch was exactly where I needed it to be. I climbed out. I didn't look back. I descended the tree, slower than I wanted, faster than was safe, and I ran. Through the garden, past the rose bushes, past the place where I had kissed Margaret and learned that love was dangerous. Through the gate, onto the street, into the night, into a world that had continued without me for 8 years and that I no longer knew how to navigate. I had no money, no identification. No shoes, I had forgotten shoes, had climbed out in my nightgown barefoot with nothing but the screwdriver in my pocket and the drawings in my memory. I walked until morning. I found a church. I told the pastor, a kind man with tired eyes, that I had been away and needed help. He didn't ask questions. He gave me shoes. He gave me breakfast. He called a shelter, then a social worker, then the police. And eventually the story came out, or part of it, the locked attic, the 8 years, the woman who called it reflection and guidance. But Celeste was ready. She had the letters signed by me, written in her elegant script, expressing gratitude for my therapeutic seclusion. She had the doctor, a man she paid, who testified that I had been emotionally disturbed and required structured environment. She had the will, the legal documents, the full weight of Southern propriety that said a widow knows best, that a stepmother's love is above suspicion, that a girl who kisses other girls is clearly in need of correction. The police closed the case. Family matter, they said. No evidence of criminal intent. The social workers shook their heads. Tragic, they said. But she's an adult now. She can make her own choices. I made my choice. I changed my name from Rowan Ashford to Rowan Cole, my mother's maiden name. I got a GED, then a scholarship to a community college, then admission to Savannah College of Art and Design. I studied architecture. I learned to design spaces that breathed, that opened, that invited light instead of sealing it out. And I built a life, slowly, carefully, the way I had loosened the screws one turn per week, one small action at a time, until the structure that had held me captive became the structure of my freedom. I didn't think about Celeste for 12 years. Not consciously. She was a ghost, a crack in the ceiling, a story I told myself was over. I built my firm. I designed restaurants, hotels, homes for people who wanted spaces that felt like embrace instead of enclosure. I won awards. I hired employees. I dated women mostly, though I was careful, always careful about who I let see the screwdriver in my pocket, the habit of measuring rooms, the way I always sat near exits. And then, at 34, I found her again. It was accidental. A client, a developer restoring historic homes in the district, mentioned the Ashford mansion in passing. Beautiful property, he said. Owned by some old widow, she's looking to sell but no one wants it. Too big, too dated, too much history. I didn't react, not visibly. I made a note. I finished the meeting. And then I drove to the street where I had not been in 16 years, where the oak tree still stood, where the mansion rose behind its iron fence like a memory I had tried to bury. Celeste was still there. I saw her through the gate, 7 to 4 now, shrunken, her pageant beauty collapsed into something papery and desperate. She was talking to a real estate agent, gesturing at the house, at the garden, at the attic window that I knew was still boarded, though perhaps with different boards now, different paint. I didn't approach her. I went home. I researched. I learned that Celeste had burned through my father's fortune, bad investments, televangelist scams, anti-aging treatments that cost more than my annual salary. She was in debt. The mansion was mortgaged. She was trying to sell, but the market was soft and the history was heavy and no one wanted to live in a house that felt like a museum to someone else's grief. And I learned something else. The attic. Celeste had turned it into a guest room. She showed it to potential buyers, to the rare visitors who still came, with a smile that was almost the same as the one she had worn when she locked me inside. "This is where my beloved stepdaughter recovered from an illness," she would say. Such a serene space. So healing. She was still performing, still using my absence as decoration, still turning my imprisonment into a selling point. I didn't plan what came next, not consciously, but I found myself buying the house next door, vacant for a decade, overgrown, forgotten. I found myself sketching plans, making calls, hiring contractors. I told myself it was an investment, a project, a way to exorcise a ghost. It was none of those things, it was architecture. And architecture, I had learned, is the art of making space tell the truth. I built a pavilion. Not a house, something lighter, more transparent, a structure of glass and mirror and steel that reflected the mansion from every angle. It was beautiful, modern, the kind of building that architectural magazines would feature, that design students would study. From the street, it looked like art. From the attic window, it looked like judgment. I designed it that way. The angles, the reflections, the way the glass caught the morning light and threw it back at the mansion, all calculated to make the old house look smaller, darker, more confined than it was. To make Celeste, looking out her window, see her own world diminished by the presence of something she couldn't control. But the pavilion was just the frame. The real work was inside. I reconstructed the attic. Not a replica, an exact reconstruction, measured from memory, verified by the original blueprints I found in the county archives. The same dimensions, the same proportions, the same light, filtered through boards that I didn't nail shut but that cast the same shadows. The same walls, covered not with my charcoal drawings but with high-resolution photographs of them. Every plan, every map, every architectural fantasy I had drawn during 2,920 days of imprisonment. I called it a museum. I didn't charge admission. I opened it to the public with a single plaque at the entrance. This room was inhabited by a child for 2,920 days. Not as punishment, as cure, according to the woman who locked her inside. The response was immediate. Local news first, then regional, then national. Architect reconstructs childhood prison as art installation. The attic drawings, 8 years of survival in charcoal and berry juice. Celeste's name was never mentioned. I was careful about that, careful about libel, careful about the legal line between truth and accusation. But everyone knew. In Savannah, everyone knew. Celeste tried to sue. She claimed I was defaming her therapeutic treatment, her maternal care, her difficult decision made in a child's best interest. Her lawyers were expensive, but they were also realistic. They told her that my documentation, the letters she had forged, the medical records that showed no doctor had ever visited, the testimony of servants I had tracked down and interviewed, would not survive discovery. They told her that therapeutic seclusion was not a recognized medical treatment, and that 8 years without schooling, without sunlight, without human contact beyond a twice-daily tray of food, looked less like care and more like what it was. She dropped the suit. But she didn't stop fighting. She tried to sell the mansion, desperately, frantically, lowering the price every week, offering incentives to buyers, staging the house with flowers and music, and the guest room in the attic that she still claimed was serene and healing. But the mansion had become toxic. The pavilion reflected its darkness back at it. The museum next door reminded every potential buyer that they would be sleeping in a house built on a child's erasure. And then I made my move. I didn't buy the mansion. That would have been obvious, traceable, legally complicated. I bought the mortgage. Through a shell company, through intermediaries, through the financial architecture I had learned to build during my years of designing spaces that hid their true purpose. I became the mansion's largest creditor. And when Celeste missed her third payment, her funds exhausted, her credit destroyed, her friends long gone, I called the note. She had 30 days to vacate, or she could negotiate. She chose to negotiate. We met in the pavilion. She didn't know it was me, not at first. The shell company had a name, Ashford Restoration LLC, and a representative, a lawyer who handled the meeting while I watched from behind the glass, from the angle I had designed specifically for this purpose, where I could see her but she couldn't see me. Mrs. Ashford, the lawyer said, the creditor is prepared to offer a generous settlement. The mansion will be converted to educational use. A school, tuition-free for young designers. You will be given lifetime residence in a facility of your choosing, fully funded. In exchange, you sign a statement, a simple acknowledgement of facts. What facts? Celeste's voice was thinner than I remembered. The pageant polish had worn away, revealing something brittle underneath. The facts of your stepdaughter's residence in the attic. The duration. The conditions, your reasons, in your own words. She refused. Of course she refused. Narcissists don't confess, they perform innocence until the stage collapses. She threatened to expose the conspiracy, to go to the press, to tell the world that she was being persecuted by vultures who wanted to steal her home. The lawyer shrugged. Then the foreclosure proceeds. You'll be evicted in 30 days, with no settlement, no residence, no funds. The choice is yours. She signed. Not gracefully, with shaking hands and tears that were probably real in their way, because even monsters grieve their own diminishment. But she signed. And the statement, carefully worded, legally vetted, became part of the public record. Not a confession of crime, the statute of limitations had expired, but an acknowledgement that I had been in the attic, that it had been 8 years, that she had been the one who put me there. I didn't release it immediately. I waited until the school opened. Until the first students arrived, mostly young, mostly queer, mostly from Southern families that didn't understand them, that had tried to fix them with prayer or punishment or silence. I waited until the mansion's doors were open, until the attic was no longer a prison but a library, until my drawings were protected behind glass, and my story was written on the walls for anyone to read. And then I published the statement, along with the photographs, along with the drawings, along with the story of a girl who had measured time by cracks in the ceiling, and had learned that freedom is not given but built screw by screw, day by day, until the window that had been sealed became the window through which she saw the world. The school is called the Rowan Ashford School of Design. I didn't name it. The students did, in their first year, when they learned the history of the building, and voted to honor the architect who built her own door. I tried to change it. I suggested other names, neutral names, names that didn't carry the weight of my history. They refused. We need to know that someone escaped, a student told me, a trans boy from Alabama, expelled from his home at 16, who had found the school through an online forum, and had arrived with nothing but a backpack and a portfolio of drawings that reminded me of my own. We need to know that the attic can become a library. That the person who locked you can become a footnote. That we can build something better than what we were given. I let him keep the name. Celeste is in a facility now, not one I chose, one her remaining funds could afford, modest, clean, with windows that look out on a parking lot instead of a pavilion of mirrors. I visit her once. Not to gloat, not to forgive, just to see. She is smaller than I remember. Frailer. The dementia that I had read about in her medical records, early onset, progressing, has begun to soften the edges of her memory. She doesn't always know where she is. She doesn't always know who she is. But when she sees me, something flickers. Recognition or its ghost. Rowan, she says, not a question, a statement, a name she hasn't spoken in years except perhaps to herself in the dark, wondering what became of the girl she locked away. I built a school, I tell her, in the house. The attic is a library now. Students read there, they draw, they plan their escapes. She looks at me with eyes that are cloudy but still in some deep place calculating. I wanted you to be good, she says, to be safe, to not make the mistakes I made. I know, I say, and I do know. Celeste had her own prison once, a marriage she didn't want, a life she had performed into existence, a self she had carved away to fit the shape of other people's expectations. She had locked me in the attic because she couldn't bear to see me free, because my freedom reminded her of everything she had surrendered, because the girl who kissed another girl in the rose garden was everything she had wanted to be and everything she had been taught to destroy. I wanted you to be free, I say, and you wanted me to be safe. But safety without freedom is just another word for prison, and I spent 8 years learning the difference. She doesn't respond. She looks out the window, at the parking lot, at a world that has moved on without her. I stand up. I touch her hand briefly, lightly, the way you touch something that is both broken and dangerous. Goodbye, Celeste, I say, and I leave. I don't look back. I have spent enough of my life looking at what confined me. I'm Rowan. I'm 35 years old. I'm sitting in the attic, my attic, the library, the space that I designed to hold both my past and my future when a student comes in. 17, from Florida. Expelled from home for being too much, too loud, too visible. He has nightmares about closed doors. He sleeps with the lights on. I show him the drawings. The originals, preserved behind glass, the charcoal lines still visible after all these years. I show him the screwdriver, my screwdriver, worn smooth, displayed in a case with a label that says the tool that built the door. I was afraid of this room, I tell him. For 8 years, it was all I saw, all I knew. I thought it would always be a prison. He looks at the window. It's open now, always open. Through it he can see the pavilion, the mirrors, the glass, the light that reflects back at the mansion and makes it seem both smaller and more significant than it is. But it's not a prison anymore, he says. No, I agree, it's a blueprint. A reminder that every space can be reimagined, that every wall can become a window if you're patient enough, if you're precise enough, if you know where to place the pressure. He looks at the screwdriver. He looks at the drawings. He looks at me, at my face, which is rounder now than it was at 14, lined with years and work and the particular softness that comes from having survived something you thought would kill you. How did you know? He asks. How did you know it would work? The screws, the window, the tree. I smile. It's not a happy smile. It's the smile of someone who has learned that happiness is not the absence of fear but the presence of choice. I didn't know, I say, I just knew I had to start. And that every turn of the screwdriver, no matter how small, was a turn toward something else. Toward light, toward air. Toward a world where I could measure time by something other than cracks in the ceiling. He nods. He doesn't fully understand. He will someday when he has his own walls to dismantle, his own screws to loosen, his own window to open. But he stays. He sits on the floor, the same floor where I lay for 2,920 days, where I learned that architecture is not just about buildings, but about the spaces we allow ourselves to inhabit. He opens a sketchbook. He begins to draw. And I watch him, this boy who is afraid of closed doors, and I think, the attic is not a prison anymore. It is a door. And every person who walks through it, who sits on this floor, who opens a sketchbook and begins to imagine something other than confinement, they are the continuation of a story that Celeste tried to end. They are the proof that no space is permanent, that no lock is absolute, that the girl who measured her life in cracks can become the woman who builds windows. If you're listening to this, and someone has locked you in a space, physical, emotional, architectural, I want you to know, the walls are not the world. They are just the current shape of your environment. And environments can be redesigned. They can be rebuilt. They can be transformed from prison to library, from confinement to classroom, from the place where you were erased to the place where you are remembered. You are not the cracks in the ceiling. You are not the boarded window. You are not the lock on the door. You are the screwdriver. You are the drawing. You are the architect who measures, who plans, who loosens one screw per week, until the structure that holds you becomes the structure that sets you free. See you in the next story.